Hey, nice to be here, everybody. I have to say this has been it's been a really, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this has been a really beautiful symposium so far. And I want to thank you, Lakshmi, and the rest of the Awake crew for asking me to participate. So to get started, I guess I'm gonna give a little bit of background about myself and how I came to be interested in this field, and then segue into my current activities. I'm 54. I spent almost a quarter of a century totally immersed in a self-destructive whole realm of addiction to heroin, IV coke, crack, methamphetamine, and along with a very ugly Mr. Hyde form of alcoholism. I suffered all of the attendant misery one finds in that. I don't really want to call it a lifestyle because it was more like a death style. That was like collapsed veins, lost half of my teeth, ruined relationships, bleak work history, jail, prison, treatment centers, methadone programs, Suboxone prescriptions, hospitals, Hep C, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It would be literally impossible to overstate how bad it was for so long. The good part of my story is that I've been clean since May of 2009. And that, to use a word, is a miracle. Maybe it isn't a biblical miracle, but it's miraculous nonetheless. In fact, one of my closest lifelong friends said to me after I'd been clean for around a year, he said, "Todd, I'm pretty agnostic, but what has happened to you is just short of a walking on water miracle." So, I know that our discussion here today is centered primarily on Ibogaine and its curative powers. But what I'm going to share about, I think, is definitely broadly applicable to this conversation. In full disclosure, and Lakshmi hinted at this, ayahuasca was the medicine that helped me. But let me back up here just a little bit. So my last detox from opiates, booze, and benzodiazepines occurred in a county jail in southern Missouri in the spring of 2009. I did not have access to Ibogaine, not just because I was in jail, but because had I even had access, I would have not been able to afford it. At 42, then I lived in my mom's basement. My dreams had led me to there. What I can speak to today, however, and what I think is fitting for our discussion are the psychedelic tools, the spiritual practices, the therapeutic processes, and the recovery communities that enabled me to become a free man in the largest sense of the word. So let me return now to my jail account of spring of 2009. Having been confined for a few weeks, I was physically clean after being released. But as all of us know, physical detoxification does not by any stretch predict future sobriety for those with conditions as severe and as chronic as mine. I detoxed many times in my life, both in and out of jail, in the detox unit or in the bathtub. The post-acute withdrawal syndrome for the severely afflicted can be interminably long, like endless. So I always return to using. Well, what was the difference that last time? Well, after that last physical kick in the county jail, after I got out, I began sitting with ayahuasca and going to lots of 12-step meetings. And most importantly, I was doing all of the personal work that those fellowships revolve around. And by that, I mean I worked the 12 steps at depth depth. Ayahuasca gave me the hope and the motivation and the introspection to do that. 12 steps were about learning to see myself as I truly was, not the way I imagined myself to be. The steps were about honesty and self-examination. They are about meditation and prayer and making restitution for the harms I had done others, and also being of service to others. 12 steps are intensely practical as well as intrinsically spiritual in nature. In the highest sense, they are about truth and love, and of course, being sober. And now I want to quickly comment on this term sober, because I often use it and I'm often asked about it. What do I mean when I say it? Well, it's not about mere abstinence from drugs or alcohol. It is about being emotionally and spiritually sober. That is to say, it's about being centered, calm, grounded, grateful. It is about soundness of mind. It is about living life on life's terms with sensitivity, creativity, and effectiveness. Sober is about partaking in the sacrament and joy of living. So that's kind of what I mean by that term, in case anybody's wondering. So inspired by my own personal recovery experience, a vision began to germinate within me, and that has continued to grow over the last decade. I imagined a new iteration of a recovery residence that would bridge the best insights and practices of traditional recovery environments with the somewhat more exotic and controversial guided application of plant-mediated altered states of consciousness. So in other words, this would be a nexus of two worlds, two previously unconnected worlds. And that union of worlds, 12 steps plus psychedelics, is what brought me back to life. Indeed, I like to refer to myself as a member of the Grateful Undead. So anyway, I digress. The need for long-term, sensitively structured transitional care is profound for those who have just encountered a psychedelic intervention for the purposes of recovery. That need is very real. And sadly, that need is largely unmet. So to answer the call of that pressing need, I founded a couple of years ago a small nonprofit called Recovery Nexus. This gets back to the idea of the connecting the nexus between two hitherto unconnected worlds of psychedelics and 12-step recovery. With the assistance of Project New Day and in collaboration with my colleagues at Natura Care Programs, we hope to open our first recovery home this coming spring. I mean, clearly we are very excited and optimistic about how this pilot project might continue or contribute to the future landscape of addiction outreach services. Let me comment here too. So traditionally, recovery residences, as they're commonly understood, have been oriented around 12-step recovery, with sometimes other elements and modalities complementing or substituting. And we hear things about CBT and motivational enhancement, stuff like that, then that's perfectly fine. The most common, well-known, I guess, I don't know if it's the most common, but the most well-known would be the Oxford House system. And I'm largely a supporter of that model for what they call a level 1 care house. Residences like Oxford embed the very principles of recovery that I absolutely believe in and have come to live by. Obviously, where I differ with them is that the catalyst for my engagement with those 12-step processes and with their associated communities came from as a direct result, from direct inspiration of sitting with ayahuasca. That is literally was the engine for the transmission of 12 steps. Without that visionary help, I never would have surrendered to the step process. That's just part of my story. So that component will never be part of any Oxford House message, I doubt. Still though, the truth remains that our experience shows and studies also strongly suggest that extended engagement with recovery living positively enhances outcomes in those seeking solutions to their problems. Some people, and I think in this particular crowd, I've heard enough about 12 steps already today, and it warms my heart when I hear that. But often when I'm in psychedelic spaces, whether it's Ibogaine or ayahuasca spaces or the psilocybin crowd, people ask me why all this focus on 12-step recovery. And speaking from my own experience and my observation of others, the answer is pretty simple. It's, not only did I have a drinking problem, but I had a thinking problem. My brain's reward system was completely dysregulated, and my mental life and emotional life was a chaotic mess. And that affected everything that I thought, felt, and did. It was absolutely vital that I reformat my hard drive and debug some of the software, or as I might say, wash my brain and mind of the many poisons, if I were to have any real chance of finding long-lasting and satisfying change. So to do that requires community, it requires process, and it requires accountability. I think with all of their genuine power and beauty, psychedelics tempt many into a form of magical thinking. I hear all sorts of extraordinary claims of success made by starry-eyed proponents. Upon closer examination, these cited data are often considerably inaccurate and misleading. Also frequently observed shortcoming with psychedelically aided recovery is that sometimes under the golden glowing halo often conferred on the seeker, there's a tendency for addicts to believe that they have made more progress than they actually have. And along with that overestimation, it is not uncommon to hear of a new belief that somehow the realities of addiction, as understood by the old paradigm, have been somehow transcended, that the rules no longer apply. That is a mistake, potentially a grave mistake. It is an error that can lead to disastrous and sometimes tragic consequences. And I'm not speculating or being hyperbolic there. I have lost some people that way, friends, comrades in recovery that came under that belief system and paid with their life. So moving on here. So I think a psychedelic friendly 12-step oriented recovery house has the potential to be a powerful container, to use a familiar concept in the psychedelic world. Another familiar concept is this notion of integration. We've heard it today a few times. It is frequently heard, and it is much discussed, and for good reason, right? But what exactly does that mean for those seeking recovery? There's a lot of different models of integration. With Recovery Nexus, our envisioned house would center primarily around the intensive study and practice of 12 steps as they are found in various adaptations, AA, NA, CODA, Al-Anon, SLAA, and of course, psychedelics in recovery, of which I'm a founding member. And then there are dynamically equivalent paths, such as refuge recovery, the Red Road to Wellbriety, and Recovery Dharma. And those will also find a welcome place in our Recovery Nexus homes. All of the programs I just mentioned are in themselves fully developed approaches to the process of integration, as well as spiritual paths of personal growth in their own right. They combine internal experience and reflection with external action. And I think it is in that coupling of contemplation and introspection along with action that optimizes the chance for an enduring transformation. Incorporating both enables effective rewiring of neural pathways along healthier lines. So that's a core component of Recovery Nexus House. Also, then in addition to that, the house curricula would include sound evidence-based education and properties and uses of psychedelic plants, with special attention given to their application to addictive disorders. Then there would be, some education along the lines of the biology and psychology of addiction. We feel that it is necessary that people have a certain grasp on those very concrete elements in some kind of plan of relapse prevention. And then also there will be a strong mindfulness component. And so mindfulness, meditation, and prayer, cultivating inner stillness along some of the lines of traditionally understood meditation practices can significantly lessen the sort of limbic disturbances or interior experiences that could lead to a relapse. We're all pretty familiar with the idea that certain stressors, triggers, make us more susceptible to making potentially fateful choices with respect to drugs and alcohol. Okay, so prior, and then also we would like, even though this is primarily a community-based recovery environment, we do have a long view towards collecting data that could be useful later on for self-improvement within the program itself, and also possibly to be published. And so prior to move-in, all clients will undergo an assessment using instruments like the Addiction Severity Index, or materials from the American Society of Addiction Medicine, or at least at minimum, utilizing the DSM-5 substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder questionnaires. In addition to that, simple PHQ-9 will be administered to get a sort of a general idea into one's level of depression. And then one more, the Adverse Childhood Event Questionnaire, will also be administered just to reveal if any additional needs might be had by a particular individual. And then really the last element in our house is that residents will be asked to enter into a relationship with an approved sponsor or mentor from outside the house. For those unfamiliar with the term, a sponsor or mentor, as they're called in refuge recovery, is a deeply trusted person with well-established sobriety and a keen knowledge of 12-step principles with, deep empathy, personal experience, and discernment. A good sponsor can offer guidance and inspiration to the newcomer as they undertake and engage the process of change for themselves. So I was chuckling to myself. I know by now it's quite possible that some of you are thinking that I'm a bit of a 12-step curmudgeon, and you'd be right. I would only add that I'm a joyful curmudgeon. I try not to take myself too seriously, but I do take the disorder of addiction very seriously. Obviously, I'm a true believer in the power of psychedelics to catalyze and support change. For me, these modalities represent a marriage made in heaven and manifested on earth to help the wayward children. This relationship needs a house to live in so that it may flourish. And so I think the building time is now. And I think that'll do it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Can you just say a little bit about what is the structure of this house? Like how many people in it, or has it started, or what's the status?
Okay, the pilot house we hope to launch actually by the end of February. If all goes as planned, the pilot house will launch then. It's going to be small. It will be 6 individuals. And we hope to, and that first house will be a men's house. And we hope, by summer that we'll have a female house. And so that's kind of what the timetable is like right now.